every single restaurant I've ever worked at has closed. It just always felt like I was going from different pirate ship to different pirate ship, just waiting for them to eventually go down. We had customers taking paintings off the walls when we were closing. It was a madhouse. And I was traumatized at the end. I was like, this was not fun at all. I don't want to do this anymore. Now I was looking at basically a year with absolutely no income. And I was like, what on earth do I do? So I decided to monetize my online work. And I mean, miraculously, I was able to monetize it and have it replace my full-time income overnight. So I kind of feel like the plants chose me. And that, led me into a whole nother world.
What happens when you don't stop being a chef, but you stop working in restaurants? For a lot of chefs, leaving the kitchens feels like walking away from the profession they trained for. But what if it actually opens the doors to an entirely different way of creating value? You're listening to Fugitive Chefs, the podcast about what happens when chefs step outside the traditional kitchen path. I'm Furkan. I've worked in kitchens like Noma and Mugaritz, and today I work outside restaurants as a senior innovation chef at Kraft Heinz. Some episodes are about food companies, some are about education, some are about entrepreneurship, but today's episode is about something much more fundamental. It's about following curiosity. Today I'm speaking with Alan Bergo, better known as the Forager Chef. Alan spent over 15 years working in professional kitchens before eventually leaving restaurants and building an entirely different career around wild ingredients, writing, education, and entrepreneurship. He's now the author of multiple books, runs one of the world's most respected resources on wild food, and has shown that sometimes leaving restaurants doesn't mean moving away from food at all. It actually means getting closer to it. So, Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm really excited about this conversation because I think your story explores something we haven't really talked about in the podcast before, I would say, because we've had chefs move into food companies, education, consulting, different sort of careers. But your journey is sort of different. I feel it's a little similar to we had Nick of North before, who is also into foraging. So I'm very interested to listen to your story. I feel people know you as the Forager Chef on social media. And Alan, so you left restaurants and somehow became even more connected to ingredients than before, which is kind of ironic, right? So before we talk about everything you're building today, let's go back to the beginning. Let's start with how did cooking, I would say, enter your life?
Oh, cooking entered my life. I was just kind of always interested in it. And my mom would let me pick restaurants that we would go out to eat at. Like my family didn't cook really elaborate food or anything like that, but I was always just kind of fascinated with it. Everybody eats every day,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually, I was kind of a ne'er-do-well when I was younger. I got grounded, and my grandma got me a cookbook by Lydia Bastianich,
Okay.
and I started cooking from it at home when I was grounded. Then, I mean, a couple months later, I was working at McDonald's and I got my first industry job.
Yeah. That's I mean that's quite a journey, right? And I mean it's very interesting. You just mentioned McDonald's, and I remember reading through your form, and you've mentioned that you have worked from McDonald's to Italian chefs, then farm to table restaurants, before becoming a sous chef at Heartland, and eventually running restaurants yourself. So looking back, when you see at that restaurant bit of your career, what do you think those restaurant years have actually taught you that goes beyond cooking, and it's something you use today, I would say, in your career?
Oh man, I mean, just being in a restaurant job, it teaches us so much. One of the biggest things is like work ethic. It
Mm-hmm.
teaches you work ethic that you can apply to anything if you want. But it really taught me, you know, at first in like fast food, like nuts and bolts. Here's how to show up for a job on time. Here's how to do things that people tell you. Here's how to respect the pecking order, and you know I learned the hard way and got fired a couple times for having a big mouth, but you learn important lessons along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
work
Yeah.
ethic is work just at a general sense, to kind of a high up view, work ethic is one of the biggest things I think the industry teaches us.
Mm-hmm. And you also mentioned, like, I mean, as we see from your work, right? For those who follow you, for those who you know a bit about you, your work today is very much focused on ingredients. So when did it become beyond that work ethic, beyond the everyday of the job? What was it? Was it a certain chef or a restaurant? I'm just curious. What changed your way of looking at ingredients in the true sense of it, and digging deeper down that hole?
It was making a sacrifice. I had worked for a guy who had worked for Lenny Russo, and I never made much money cooking, right? So I was always like, okay, how can I make a little bit more money? And my friend Andy convinced me to take a $2 an hour pay cut, which I mean, back in like 2005, it was a lot of money. And he
Yeah.
convinced me to take a pay cut to go work at Heartland. So the menu changed every single day, like very chez panisse, and we only used products from within 200 miles of Minnesota. So there, I made a sacrifice. I had to give up my apartment, and I basement hopped basically the entire time I was
Wow.
there because I loved the ingredients. I really didn't the money, yeah, like yeah, I needed to be able to pay my bills, but really what I wanted, what my little heart wanted was to cook with the coolest stuff, to work with cool people. What's the next cool thing that I can cook with? What's the next interesting ingredient that I can learn about? And then the history and everything behind them. And at Heartland, I started getting exposed to things that I had never cooked before, and making that jump, taking a pay cut to go and learn skills. That was one of the best decisions that I ever made. I mean, it was a little bit painful at the time, but the things that I learned there and the things I was exposed to, like a menu that changed every day, and then I got to write the menu for my station every day. And I think there was like 14 items when I started that I would change every day. Maybe
Yeah.
it's not the whole thing is changing, but a number of different components. I mean, it makes you kind of like a green beret. And like after 4.5 years, that I could just go into a restaurant and look at the shelves in the cooler and just write a whole menu. It taught me different skills. It would have been easier to go to a place and make more money,
Hmm.
but it was an investment in my creative skill set that was really valuable. But I started to see these new things I'd never worked with, and many of them were wild. We had like 80 purveyors, and obviously didn't make a lot of money. I would go and play disc golf before I went into work. I'd usually go
Okay.
in like 2 hours early and then
Yeah.
punch in when I was supposed to. But I go play disc golf because it was free. And one day I saw a mushroom as a chicken of the woods that I had just
Hmm.
put on the menu the day before. And something clicked. And I just kind of understood right then and there that this mushrooms and all these ingredients I'd been working with in the restaurant, like finding them myself wasn't some crazy unattainable thing. It was more just about, have we had rain and being in the right place at the right time. So immediately I got really interested in that and thought, first I thought maybe I could like sell stuff to the restaurant, and I did, and it worked out. But you're not going to be rich. Like you'd be lucky to
Yeah.
fill your gas tank. But what happened was that I learned about, the cadence of seasonal ingredients in my area, and it really just made me more in touch with the place that I live and what I can eat that was growing around me. And then I started to teach myself. I bought myself like every book on mushrooms that I could for my area. And then sometimes you go out and you don't find mushrooms. So then I started to teach myself about plants, and then
Okay.
I kind of got to the extent of what I could teach myself. So then I started to make friends that knew a lot more than me, and kind of so on and so forth, and things just kind of snowballed from there. But I'm kind of an obsessive learner, and at first I would study different cuisines, right? So I studied Italian food for a number of years and worked under a bunch of guys from Italy, and French food and farm to table food. And then kind of the final frontier of that was harvesting the ingredients myself and learning about what grew around me that I could put on a menu and tasted good and was interesting.
Yeah, and that itself is such a big learning curve, right? And because it's ironic that we do not. I feel in the traditional sense of culinary education or however it is, I think there are parts of it which are changing today. But it's ironic how we focus so much on techniques and processes that we somehow ignore this part of growing, harvesting, even if it's not wild, the process of growing a plant or what goes behind that. But for you, it stemmed from curiosity, and as you've mentioned, you've done a lot of self-learning into that. But all of this actually stemmed from what you mentioned about the cool ingredients. But I was very interested in that because a lot of people would argue to say that okay, cool ingredients are the ones which are the most expensive, the foie gras and caviars of the world. For you at that point, Alan, as a chef stepping into this new environment where there is a certain uh, a more affection to something which is very different compared to when you look at what are cool ingredients for the Michelin stars and French restaurants of the world. What was in that moment about forage the wild ingredients that made them cool for you? Was it storytelling, exclusivity?
Well, there's a duality here with a lot of the wild ingredients. Like a lot of the greens are just weeds. So
Mhm.
stinging nettles. I saw that we paid more for stinging nettles than we did for any type of heirloom lettuce. And
Okay.
I hadn't worked with them. I was like, "Oh, these are cool." And then, oh, there's all these like historical recipes and cultural traditions, especially in the Mediterranean, but then around the world, like really like any place that nettles grow and they grow around the world, they're going to have traditional recipes for them. So you have in Spanish, you have sopa de ortigas. In French, you
Uh-huh.
got soup de ortie.
Yeah.
Then you have you have Turkish versions all around the world. Nasal sopa in Scandinavia, like all these places have different traditions for this stuff, and it was a portal that I could go through and see. Oh, this is cool. These are like heirloom ingredients, like just like all the other things that we're working with. And I just wanted to know more about them, and it's also easily accessible because they weren't foie gras, truffles, and caviar. They were super cheap. They were
Yeah.
free, and
Yeah.
I could go to my grandparents' land. And I remember picking nettles for a dinner for the Swedish ambassador with my grandma, and she just thought it was the coolest thing. And so did I. And it also, from a job standpoint, one of the things I try to tell, like, I get a lot of messages from chefs, like, it was something that set me apart, right? It was something
Mm.
different. And I knew that too. There was a sort of competitive advantage aspect to it that made me different from anyone else on the line. We would sit down for menu meeting, and then I would have ingredients on my menu that no one else had, and they're like, "Where did you get those?" They're like, "Well, I picked them on the disc golf course," and it set me apart. It was different.
It's very interesting what you say for me because I'm also curious that it's not easy. This path is not easy, and of course, it's more like more people like you creating content on this or whatever medium you're using to create more knowledge about this. It's not just creating knowledge, but as you said, looking into what is already being done in cultures, tradition, ancestral techniques, and giving it possibly a format which is more accessible for somebody young. Like I know during the research I was doing in Basque Culinary Center, especially about nettles, we use them to coagulate milk and make cheese out of it. And this was like a technique we read in a very traditional Basque book written in the Basque language. But these things, unfortunately, are not in the most, I would say, TikTok generation formats where you need a 10-second attention span. So how has that journey been for you? Firstly, I don't understand how was your approach to finding knowledge. As you said, you mentioned books as your resource, but I would love to know more of like how did you access all this knowledge on this niche, and today how do you use that, because a lot of your work is content generation. How is that interaction for you to translate something which exists but it's not in the best format possibly?
Yeah, a lot of times I'm not like with my first book. I really just studied how cultural traditions around the world with wild plants, and I didn't make changes really to things. All I did was say, hey, instead of grab a bag of something, I'll say you can take 8 ounces, and
Mm.
really just put it into a format where we make it so it is easily replicable for the home cook. And and that's really just a lot of what I did. The content creation, how I started researching things, kind of like people have a podcast that will sometimes like teach themselves. I started a website when I was living in my friend's basement, and I saw that there was no resources for cooking with these things. And like some of my peers, like my mentor Sam Thayer, I wanted to create the resource that I wished existed when I had started. And it wasn't to make money or anything like that. It was just for me. I thought, hey, maybe this is like a calling. This is like kind of like a business card. Maybe it can help me get better chef jobs was originally what I thought of. So I would just kind of like write down everything I knew about a plant or a mushroom, and I would put it on a post on my blog. And I would do that in my spare time after I was done working in the kitchen. And that's changed over the years. The website is still what I focus most of my attention on. Uh, I feel like one thing that people on the social media thing side of things may kind of forget is like social media is like a rental, and a website is like a house.
True.
And the algorithm and all these companies, they can change the landscape at the drop of a hat. They can ban your account, and you have no
Mhm.
control over that. But having a website, that's yours, and it's like a home that you will always have. So I just kept putting stuff on there whenever I felt like it, and I had to kind of learn photography at the same time. I worked
Mhm.
as a stylist on Lenny Russo, my old chef's first book. Originally, I
Okay.
was the photographer, and then they quickly fired me. But I stayed on as a stylist, and I got to work with a photographer, two photographers for like a year on that project. So that kind of started my interest in photography because I do all my own photography and videography, uh, similar to many creators, but it's not like Instagram video and stuff like that was not what I originally set out to do. And that's become kind of like a necessary evil because that's what the algorithm
Yeah.
wants to show to people. And I do that kind of with clenched teeth. I
Hmm.
I'd still rather like just put up still images of things that I think are interesting. But really it's just the website was what I started with, and I just branched out from there.
Hmm. Yeah, that's very interesting for me because I mean, for somebody who's listening to the podcast who first hears about you getting interested into cooking because of a book you had, from there you moving into restaurants and leading restaurants, having a restaurant yourself, and for them when they suddenly hear that Alan is speaking about having a website or building a website, or he has knowledge about what an algorithm is, how can you control content property. So I think there's a gap which we need to fill for these listeners because unfortunately, most people listening about a story of a chef just put them in a certain box, which is cooking and growing the ranks, owning restaurants, owning multiple restaurants, and that's the traditional path they put themselves into. But what stuck me out in your application, for example, was that you did not. You mentioned that you did not leave restaurants because you had a perfect plan on what to do next, but you said you were somehow forced into it. Take us back to that moment. What do you mean by forced into it? What actually happened, and yeah, what were the steps you took to get out of
Yeah,
restaurant business?
yeah, so this was a few years before the pandemic, and I had my first executive chef job that lasted for like 2.5 years, and then the restaurant closed. I mean, every single restaurant I've ever worked at has closed. So right there, just I knew the landscape was so volatile. It just always felt like I was going from different pirate ship to different pirate ship, just waiting for them to eventually go down. But take the tricks that I learned along with me. And then I went to the next restaurant where I was executive chef. That was Lucia's in Minneapolis. And then that closed. And after that closed, I mean, I stayed and went down with the ship both times. I mean, it's brutal. Closings can be just brutal. I mean, the restaurant had been around for like 30 years. We had customers taking paintings off the walls when we were closing. It was a madhouse. And I was traumatized at the end. I was like, this was not fun at all. I don't want to do this anymore. But I had still, I had made a name for myself through my online work and writing. I'd been interviewed a few times, and it was part of the draw of me being at these kitchens. But it wasn't all just me. It wasn't all just me and my persona. It was still like partly like the history of the restaurants and
Hmm.
things like that that people would come there for, and it's seasonal eating and all of that. But I had no job. So I just took some time and was on unemployment and licked my wounds for a little while. I was living on my ex-girlfriend's 400-acre family farm. It was like an old commune in western Wisconsin. And there was all the plants there that I would use to supply the restaurants. But I just took time to just do me. And I had started working on a manuscript because I was like, well, someday I'll write a book. And I started working on that more and just said, you know what? I'm going to write this book and I'm going to sell it, and I'm going to write a book. I don't, because I have to do something if I'm not working in a kitchen, because my spirit was broken. There's really like nothing that has taken away the love of cooking for me. But after the last restaurant closing, I didn't know. I was just shell shocked. I couldn't do it. But I started doing anything that I could to make money. So I'd done a little bit of media work. I had shot like a one or two TV pilots. And so I was trying to work on those things. I had a lamb and goat farm hired me and paid me with grants from the USDA
Okay.
to make homemade videos about how to make homemade dog treats out of lamb and goat meat. I did
Mhm.
anything that I could. And then eventually that money dried up, and the government kind of cut the funding out of the farm bill. And I remember I was at my grandparents' place in Arizona, and I got an email like, "Hey, the funding ran out." Like they were paying me like it wasn't a lot. It's like 20 grand a year, but it was enough to keep me afloat with some other things that I was doing. But now I was looking at basically a year with absolutely no income. And I was like, what on earth do I do? The book is not out yet. And I mean, for the record, books really don't make that much money either. So I was like, what can I possibly do? And I had been, writing my website for like 9 years at this point, and I knew that I had some peers that had monetized their online work. And I said that I would never do that. I was like, this is just my creative thing. I will never do that. This is just something to help me get better chef jobs. But I was between a rock and a hard place. So I decided to monetize my online work. And I mean, miraculously, this is not the case now, but I was able to monetize it and have it replace my full-time income overnight. And
Oh,
that
wow.
it's it but I didn't plan that, and I think
Yeah.
part of the reason that it worked was because I didn't start doing this to make money. I started doing it because I was
Hmm.
extremely passionate about it. So I kind of feel like the plants chose me. And that, led me into a whole nother world of, monetized online content. It's like people go to school, they go get degrees for this stuff now. And I was in a bit over my head, and it is not easy, but it didn't make a lot, but it made enough that I could do it and focus on the book and free me up a little bit to do other things, do dinners here and there, do a festival here and there. It freed me up enough so that I could focus on my creative work. And that was really like the moment where things changed, and I was like, okay, I can cobble together a few different streams of income, and I can just get by and hold on. And if I hold on long enough, maybe I can survive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a massive realization, right? I feel, especially coming as chefs into this, especially being chefs who have been always paid for the intrinsic value is only the food that you're serving to the guest. Or it's a very experience based economy where you learn and you program yourself to believe that okay, I serve food and that's how money comes to me. And knowledge, I mean, I don't know, knowledge based expertise, these things are not really, you don't really think this could be transactional or it could make money itself. So that's one thing I admire when I was looking at your work, Alan, because you didn't simply become a content creator in the sense of the word, but you built expertise first around it. And as you said, you did not go with the monetizing part while building the expertise. And I feel that's why your content stands out. And your website eventually became slowly the center of your business. Since then, you've written books. You've also been featured in publications around the world. You've even had a show on Apple TV. But all of this has come to you now after, of course, eventually building this expertise slowly. But if you look back today and tell your younger self, working those long hours in restaurants, when you would tell to this younger self that you would end up where you are today and where you sit today, do you think that younger self would believe you? What would that conversation be like? I just want to go through your head where you stand today.
Oh man, I mean, I wouldn't believe it. Some days I still don't believe it. I wake up and
Yeah.
have to pinch myself. Uh, but it's kind of a testament to just holding on to what you believe in and being true to yourself, and not stopping. I just wanted to. It was my hobby. It was my passion. So I just kept going and kept going, and I never stopped. And it was one thing, putting out something every week to my audience that was new, that I was interested in. That was, I don't know, kind of like an anchor that kept me grounded. And I knew, like, come hell or high water or whatever, I'm going to put something out this week that I'm excited to share with people. I'm going to interact with some people around the world now. Like, people started coming in. I'm getting comments from all kinds of different places. And that got really exciting because I started to learn from people that I thought, like, I'm going to share something and teach these people something. I started to learn from them, and it started to be more of an exchange. And that was really, really cool. Just something I could have never imagined it would be like that.
I mean, people know you in the internet as the Forager Chef, right, Alan? But I feel, from what I listen, from what I've seen, from what you share with the story of how you got there, I feel that's the whole purpose of the podcast as well. Because there is, as you said, there is the algorithmic economy. There's website, which is your own space, and then there is long form content where my idea is not just to show people the transformation, like okay, Alan was this person who started off at McDonald's and today is doing this, but to also track your journey and how you got where you are. And from what my conclusion is that I actually don't think your work is just about foraging. It's about looking, in a sense, differently at ingredients. So what I want to understand from you is how has like spending so much time outside the restaurant system and looking at ingredients per se has changed the way about cooking itself. Because today I believe you still do cooking, be it on a personal level, be it at these events that you spoke about here and there. How has the cook Alan changed when it comes to using ingredients to cook with?
Well, I'd say I'm a lot more instinctual and I'm a lot more intuitive. I look at something and just immediately think, can I eat that? What is the edible stage of this? Is there some part of this thing that I could eat that I haven't eaten before? And that kind of ties into like I like to grow a lot of plants now, which has really really changed things. But I think from like a cook perspective, I put a lot less on the plate now
Hmm.
than I used to, and my food is definitely more ingredient focused. I did a dinner, a pretty big menu like 2 days ago, and
Okay.
I think my favorite course was a bowl of plants that I boiled until they were tender, and then I put some olive oil and lemon and a pinch of crunchy salt on it. And what I told them during the dinner, it was all Fortune 500 CEOs.
Okay.
And you could see the looks on their faces when I told them, like, this is 15 different species of edible weeds from my yard. And some of them are kind of like, huh? And then they take a bite and they're like, oh, it's really good. It's like, one of them said, it's like the best bowl of spinach that I've ever had. Simplicity, minimalism, these are really things that I would use to describe my food now. I think when we're young as cooks, we tend to try to like make things too fancy. It's like, oh, it
Mm-hmm.
needs this, it needs that. We put too much on the plate. And I used to tell my cooks, like, before you put one more thing on that plate, take two things off. So I would say it definitely has influenced my cooking in that it's simpler now and it's just way more ingredient focused. And the most complex part about that recipe is I harvested the plants at the perfect stage, each of them, all of these different species, and I boil them until they're just the perfect moment when all of them are tender, and just treat them simply and let them shine.
Yeah, yeah, less is more, right? I mean, truly, it's the struggle for chefs, I think, because I think the way our career it's a lot about showing, exhibiting what we are good at, rather than, as you said, removing those two ingredients, giving the ingredient itself, which is should be the start of the plate, giving it the space to breathe, and if you treat it right, it doesn't need cover ups to yeah cover the flaws that you think as a cook that you could add more towards. It's very interesting uh, thinking that you've shared with us, and I feel a lot of chefs listening could connect with this, and specifically speaking to those chefs, and especially, I mean, I come as well, right? I right now just came back to my work from my work. I work at Kraft Heinz today, which is a very different side of the food industry. So what I want to understand from you is, because you have spent a lot of time studying how different cultures use wild foods, because that's what you mentioned, that you've not really invented the wheel, but you've gone back to see what has been done and how can this be given a refresher of sorts. But what do you think about chefs when they are cooking today without the knowledge that you have, are overlooking? What are they typically overlooking because we have become so dependent on the conventional supply chains, which work the way they work, which don't let you go out and seek what the nature is offering to cook with it? What have we overlooked in terms of being chefs as a skill, you know?
What have we overlooked? I mean, well, I mean, the minimalism, I would say first. I would also say there's lots of ways to set yourself apart. One of the barriers to kind of cooking like I do is that a lot of the ingredients I work with you can't buy. Like, you can't
Right.
call Cisco and say, can I get XYZ? But there's ways to get around that. I mean, if you're at home or if you have a restaurant, if you have space for a tiny little planter, right? You can grow some lemon gem marigolds, and
Mhm.
you don't need a lot of space at all. You can grow some nasturtiums, right? And it doesn't cost a lot of money. It'll make the food stand out. It'll kind of put you in touch with growing something and really make you see things in kind of a different light there. Micro seasons is another
Mhm.
thing. We think of seasons as like the four seasons, but
Yep.
for me, I mean, my friend Sammy Talberg from Finland just put out a book that's about 72 micro seasons. And I think thinking about seasons, like really breaking them up, it can be useful too. And I mean, some of these ingredients, like one thing that people can do is that we're so reliant on these big broad line purveyors, but just
Mhm.
working like a couple local farms, or just going to the farmers market and walking through it and seeing what's available. And I used to shop at the farmers market for the restaurant all the time because the stuff was relatively cheap, and I could get things again that were seasonal, and I could not get them from a broad line purveyor.
And for you, Alan, becoming a chef and today becoming an entrepreneur, which one for you was difficult? I mean, building a website, writing books, consulting, growing audience, all of these are skills that chefs don't usually learn, right? So I want to understand which bit for you was harder and what kind of skills did you have to teach yourself on the fly while you came up with these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's practice makes perfect. And if
Mm-hmm.
you look at if you look at my early work, which I leave up there as like legacy content, you'll see a natural progression. And it's just study and just repetition and just like working on knife cuts, right?
Yeah.
It's just studying and working at something and failing 9 times out of 10, but that one success that you get to hold on to and will keep pushing you further and further.
And you also mentioned something very fascinating, Alan. When I was reading through it, I was like, okay, this is a genius idea. And how does the chef end up having this idea? I think it would help the listeners also to understand because you mentioned this thing about after restaurants, you used to supply a restaurant with around 50 pounds of foraged ingredients every week using a retainer model. How did that idea come up? How did you come up with, okay, what is the need of like having a more fluid economy, or how did you come up with this model to work with the restaurants?
Yeah, that's a great thing to bring up. So I think outside the box. I never went to culinary school, and I'm kind of grateful for that because I kind of came up with my own framework of how to do things. But after at my restaurant had closed, but I still lived on this big farm where I had access to so many different really awesome ingredients. I I thought, what can I do? I need like one more revenue stream, and is there a way that maybe I can get? I wanted to raise my profile, and if you're an entrepreneur and trying to make a name for yourself, there's a number of different ways I could talk about that you can do that. But this was one, and I was just like, hey. Let's just try this and see how it works. So there was the Bachelor Farmer was a really well-known seasonal restaurant here in the Twin Cities, and I knew they had a new chef that was from Seattle. So I was like, okay, so this guy's coming in. He may not know everything about our seasons. I should send him a message and see if he wants to work together. And I have a lot of peers that send me questions. They try to sell that they want to sell these wild ingredients to chefs, and
Mm-hmm.
and you're not going to make a lot of money. And for me, I knew a lot about plants and mushrooms at this time. So the way I thought of it is like, is it worth my time to say, would you like to buy these violet greens? And then they say
Mm-hmm.
no, and I'm like, okay, now I'll go home. That that's the wrong way to think about it. I
Yeah.
have the knowledge. You're lucky if I bring you anything at all.
Mm-hmm.
So what I pitched to them was, you can just pay me like $500 a week, and I'll bring you whatever I want. And you are lucky that I bring that to you. But also, there was an exclusivity agreement. So I was like, I will only supply you. So this is now like a marketing tool. And then we got in touch with some of their PR people and a couple food writers because I know most of the food writers around here. So then we got a couple stories about it going online. Then that makes interest in the restaurant, also makes interest in me. Then what happened from there is, and you kind of, I could have never seen these things coming, but it's kind of a testament to just holding on to an idea and your passion. Things will just kind of come to you when you hold that intention. So me supplying that restaurant, we only did it for one season, but a couple other projects spawned from that. So one of them was me collaborating with a distillery. So I would bring them uh, all kinds of ingredients, and they made a couple different lines of products, and they do. It wasn't huge. They'd make like 1,000 bottles a year of 3 different flavors of stuff that was all flavored with ingredients that I would pick for them. This was a ton of work, and I didn't make a lot of money. But some other people heard about things like that, and I still get messages about the liquor collaboration project. The bigger thing that happened was the food at the restaurant. The restaurant, wanted to promote we're using Allen's ingredients, and they would have special dinners, and we did a couple panels and things like that where we could kind of educate the public on what we were doing. But there was a filmmaker who had seen I did something with REI for the Sundance Film Festival. They did like a little profile on me. He'd seen that, but then he came and he ate a really interesting thing. It was an unopened angelica blossom. And this guy came and ate that at the restaurant. And then he was like, oh, this is cool. I've never had anything like this. I should make a show with this guy. Then the pandemic happened and people stopped filming. And he and I ended up making a show together just the two of us during the pandemic, but it was really because he went and ate that thing at the restaurant. So just me having an idea and trying something out, it started. When you're doing creative work, it can kind of blossom and take different turns and curves, and lead you into areas that you really wouldn't expect. So it turned into all kinds of different things just by me taking a chance and saying, "Hey, this sounds fun. Let's try it out."
I feel that's what you mentioned about in the very beginning, right? Thinking out of the box. I feel because I mean, part of what makes it difficult to do these transitions and do the things that you're doing is because you're the pioneer in doing it. The benefits are, of course, as you said, when a restaurant does it, when the model works, and as you said, the model will only work when the right person who has the right job is done with the right person. If the chef starts who doesn't have the information or the knowledge you have, they start exploring and playing with it, they can put off diners just because they've not treated it right, they've not picked at the right moment. As you said, all these plants have their own moments, and there's very microclimates. And it's like, I think that's been a genius, what I can spot of you saying that, okay, I'll control this knowledge because I know how I can best do, like, benefit them, not only my business. And then you've used this retainer model, which gives some sort of sense of security, especially with this something a new economy, a new flow of money from a restaurant, which traditionally they would not think they need somebody who needs to go pick ingredients for them, and you slowly bring them into. So I think it's not just something you're doing for your business, but also for the broader community of which I hope grows with time of foraging. Because again, I think that's where I feel also restaurants are losing clients, or losing not just clients but interest. Why should somebody be interested to come dine at yours and not the neighboring restaurant? Is because you can provide something which has a story, which is very exclusive to you or your journey, or attaching the name of say Alan or some other forager to it. I think this storytelling or building this narrative is where many restaurants are struggling, and that's where you come in. So that's very interesting for me. And I think it's because of these stories of what you've shared is that people see somebody in you who they aspire to be. They see there's a model that has worked out for you. And that's also happens to be the kind of audience I speak to, are chefs who are either outside restaurants already or are in restaurants, but the version of life they're living, the version of the life that the restaurant industry or the career they are in lets them live, but it does not match with probably aspirations or differences in the way of life they have today compared to 5 years ago. And they have the struggle, right? Like, how can I transition outside, take my knowledge and skill set and take it outside restaurants? And you mentioned that a lot of chefs reach out to you asking these questions. I would love to know, like, what are they really asking you? Do you think they try to leave restaurants, or they have some ideas where they're stuck on how to move next on them? So what's the primary questions coming to you on this specific topic of transitioning outside restaurants?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people just want to vent. The biggest thing is most of the time people say, "How did you do it? How do I get out?"
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do I get out and actually make a living? And kind of tying back to the beginning, you know, one of the things I tell them is like, "Hey, you can do all kinds of things because the culinary industry has taught you, it has instilled in you this, iron work ethic that you can apply to all kinds of different things. And you also have a knowledge of food that can be used for things that are very different from just being behind a stove. And if I was still in the industry now, I mean, I don't know if I'd be running a restaurant. I was trying to leave the entire time to get into a sales gig with a fun supplier where I could sell really interesting ingredients. And that was one way that I had planned originally to kind of use my knowledge of food and food history and the storytelling, was to do that. But I never really had enough experience in management to be taken seriously for a sales role. But a lot of times they want to know, how do I get out, or they want advice on starting a business, or they just want somebody to commiserate with. And I'll tell them kind of all kinds of things. One of the things I say is, it can help to find your passion. How do you do that? Sometimes you need to get out of where you are. So
Right.
a really good example is my buddy Danny. And I have a few friends like this that I'll kind of mentor. He's, like 10 years younger than me, and he was working at a great place that was seasonal in Michigan, and he liked it, but he was just feeling burnt out from the grind. And one thing I told him was, one of the things that I did was, I sat down one day. My girlfriend forced me, and she said, "You're going to sit down and we're going to do
Mm-hmm.
like a visioning exercise." And it sounds a little woo woo, but
Okay.
I'll tell you, it was one of the most impactful things that I did. And she said, "Give yourself the freedom to just right? If you could have a job, what would it look like? And there's like no limits on anything. And I sat down and just wrote down what I would like to do. And I told Danny to do the same thing. I said, where do you want to work? If you could snap your fingers and you could work anywhere, where would you work? And he said, I want to work at Stone Barns. I would love to work there. I said, okay,
Okay.
tomorrow you're gonna reach out to them. And if you don't hear back, you're going to reach out again and you're going to be extremely persistent. When I would hire people, I always want the eager beaver. I would take
Hmm.
someone, hired a guy from Chipotle who became my most trusted cook and then sous chef. And I hired him over somebody with a ton of culinary experience in great restaurants. And it was a great decision because you find the runner, train him for the race. And I knew he had that thing that you couldn't teach, which is just the ambition and the curiosity to learn. Well, Danny did that, and 2 weeks later, he'd moved to New York, and he's working at Stone Barns now. And he is so happy. He's working, but he's also working as a butcher, so it's not on the line. I would say, it's probably a little bit less impact on your body and stress on your
Right.
mind. I'd be intimidated walking into that kitchen, but I helped him get some of the tools that he needed, and just to make that jump and just say like, hey, what if I do this? And just breaking out of where you are, getting out of your comfort zone can help reignite that passion. I mean, I used to go and just do stages all around and just to go learn new things. And those were so helpful. Just go work for free for a day at some other place and see what you can pick up. But also, like, you can shoot for the moon. Like, think about the life that you would want to live and what you would want to do and imagine that that's possible. Like, just allow yourself to imagine that.
Okay.
That's something that I tell a lot of people. Some people want advice on starting businesses. Like a
Mm.
guy a couple weeks ago was going to start a supper club meal in a box in the frozen food section, but specifically in a specific part of a different state.
Okay.
And then we talk about different things. And I don't have a lot of experience with that, but I know people who do, and maybe I can turn them on to that. Another thing that I tell people is you could start a website. It doesn't mean it has to be a blog like
Mhm.
mine, but it'll help. It'll help set you apart. Another friend of mine that I mentor, his name is Lorenzo. He had done a little bit of like private chef work and like meal planning. I told him, I was like, hey, you're getting some traction on that. Like, maybe add some of that to your website. Add that you do that. Add a subheading and stuff. Like, if you put that online, people will be able to find it, and if they're looking for people like that in the area. Now, last time I talked to him, he's doing like $500 days when he's
Oh,
working, and
wow.
he's doing it like full time, along
Mhm.
with like teaching foraging classes and stuff like that. And that's fantastic. But you kind of sometimes you may need to do a bunch of different things and have a bunch of irons in the fire, and it's not easy. Nothing is easy. What I'm doing is not easy at all, and it's super dynamic, and there's all kinds of things that I need to learn and get better at. But you may need to try some things out and see what you like, and if you don't like, move on. But don't be scared to try different things and most importantly, get out of your comfort zone, because you're going to learn. It may not be necessarily what you thought you were going to learn about food, but you'll learn important things that you can bring along the way.
100%. I mean, I couldn't sum this up better, Alan. I feel it does make a big impact when it comes from you, especially for people asking for this kind of mentoring, you call it, or advice, you call it, because it's not just about because business skills, right? I mean, why are they not going to say Harvard MBA graduate or coaches who do business, but they are coming to you because they confide in a person who has walked the path and does come from a certain amount of familiarity with what the reality of coming as a chef having a business is. And I feel it is that what I think the industry needs more of people. First of all, I feel it's upon the person who wants the change, who wants to make the transition, to reach out. I feel that's the number one skill or thing that you need to have in your head. That's the one thing I promote the most, rather than anything else. Is first of all, look for where the resource lies. There's enough means to look for the resource, and don't feel shy to reach out, because there are people who might look. I mean, for the amount of followers you have, Alan, I feel a lot of people could feel like, okay, I can't reach out to Alan. He might not just respond to me, but I feel there's a lot of being persistent. As I said, it's whether it's a single person who you aspire to be like, or who you think has the resources you want, or whether it's a restaurant, as you said. Just show up, keep showing up enough amount of times, and there will be doors which will open. And it's the only way you can get information is seeking it and reaching out for people who might have it. So thank you so much for that, Alan. I feel it's been very interesting to listen to your journey. Before I let you go, I would love to hear from you the identity side of things, because that's what I've been seeing in the recent episodes I've had, is where I have people like you, right? Today evening, you won't be just opening a restaurant, serving guests in person, getting their feedback immediately, the classic version of chefs that all of us grew up into and aspiring that this is what life would look like when we signed up to, say, being a chef, or told our family members, I'll be a chef someday. For you, how is that today? Because the job you do, I'm of the opinion is of a much bigger impact of not just diners, but the people that you're mentoring, coaching, the kind of work that you're putting out, setting new pathway for this whole community industry of wild food, ingredients, foraging. How do you see yourself today from the chef you had set out to be? How much do you identify with the meaning of that word to you today?
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point you kind of get grandfathered in for always being a chef. In some ways, because now I'll go give a keynote speech to 1,000 chefs in Vegas, and they'll all call me chef, even though I'm not running a restaurant from day to day. So like I still identify with many aspects of that, but it's different now. And I sort of think of restaurants as, when I was in restaurants, as kind of like, come to my kitchen and I will serve things to you, and like, this is the way that it is. And I'm a lot more relaxed now, and I'm more of a teacher now, and I really like that. Like, a lot of people will say, like, don't you miss like serving people every week and serving food for the masses? I miss my coworkers, and
Yeah.
I miss the camaraderie there. But now if I look at on my website, and there's, tens of thousands of people will come every day, and then I get messages from people like, hey, you taught me a skill I will have for the rest of my life. I just took my granddaughter out back and we're picking nettles and we made the most delicious soup. We're going to make this forever. Thank you so much. Like, I'm able to teach people like actionable skills that they can use to improve their life, skills that they will have for the rest of their life. And that is a lot different than just giving someone a meal, right? That's something that I could have never seen, something I never expected. And it's probably the biggest difference that I see now is more of just the educating people and teaching them how to make things that I will make, as opposed to saying, hey, just eat this.
Yeah. No, 100%, 100% with you on that, Alan. And I love the job you're doing. Your story, as I said, many points in your story, I told you how fascinating it is, the way you have, I would say in a way, seen this not very obvious path and improved it on the way, on the version of it you follow today is so much different from the way you started. And so it's very inspiring for me and for the listeners, I think, who might not specifically go for the foraging niche, but to understand, I feel it takes a lot of courage to say that I am going to stop following the passion I had for this industry in the format I knew about it, but rather think that there's a different place for me to contribute to this industry, still be relevant, and possibly do more impactful work like the one you're doing today. I think what I enjoyed the most about this conversation is that it challenges one of the biggest assumptions we have as chefs, that if you leave restaurants, you somehow leave cooking behind. I think your story shows the opposite, right? Sometimes stepping outside the kitchen, it allows you to go even deeper into ingredients, curiosity, culture, craftsmanship that you could ever before. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and it's been a pleasure talking to you.
That was great. Thanks for having me.
And to everyone listening, if you enjoyed the conversation, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a rating or review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or YouTube. It helps more people discover these stories and helps grow the community around Fugitive Chefs. If you know another chef who's questioning what comes after restaurants, share this episode with them. It might just be what they're looking for. Until next time, thanks for listening.